Alright, welcome back to the Bootstrap 3 Essential Training. In this tutorial we're going to start looking at the grid system. So we're going to go through Understanding the Grid System Part 1. Bootstrap includes a responsive, mobile-first fluid grid system as part of its development. The grid system scales up to 12 columns as the device or viewport size increases. The grid system includes predefined classes for ease in laying out your page, as well as a group of powerful mixins that are used for generating a more semantic layout. Grid systems in Bootstrap are used for creating page layouts. This is accomplished through a series of rows and columns that enclose the content of the page. There are a couple of rules that need to be followed when laying out these pages. Rows must be placed within containers. We just talked about containers in the previous tutorial. We can use the container class or the container fluid class, but a row must be placed into a container. The content of your page must be placed within columns, and only columns may be immediate children of rows. And this may be a little confusing right now, but once we start working through the demonstrations, you'll understand it. It makes good sense. But just keep in mind that we have to have a container. The container must include our rows, and if we want to use columns, they must be part of or included inside the row. The grid system in Bootstrap is based on a 12-column layout. So let's move into our development environment and demonstrate some of the different things that we can do with the grid system in Bootstrap. Alright, so I'm back in my development environment. The first thing you want to do is make sure your Apache server is up and running, because we'll be using that as we test what we're getting ready to input into our fields. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my text editor, Sublime Text 2 I'll be using for this demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and load in my web browser, even though I don't have anything loaded yet. Let's go ahead and open up the file we created in the last exercise, container.html. And I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Let's do a save as. I'm going to save that as grid1.html. I'm still in that section 2 folder. So I'm just going to say grid_1.html. And the reason I'm using the one is I think we're going to have probably a lot more than one part to this tutorial, because there's a lot of different things we can do with these grids, and I want to demonstrate a lot of it so it makes good sense to you. So the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and demonstrate a 12-column layout and what we mean by that. So as we talked about in the presentation, the first thing we need to do if we're going to do a layout at all using the grid system is I've got to create a div, and I have to give it a class of row. And that's what we were talking about in the presentation when I said that these columns must be contained inside of a row. So we're basically setting up a brand new row for our page. And you'll see where these rows come in handy as we have more complex layouts. I'm going to go ahead and close that div. So now I've got the closing tag for that row div. I'm going to go ahead and label that just like I did my container tag. Because again, I like keeping track of these things, especially when we get complex layouts. I mean, you'll see that we have a lot of closing divs on top of one another, and it allows me to keep track of where things are in my page. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create some divs with this 12 column. And I actually have this in my exercise file, so you don't have to watch me type it. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste inside my row. I'm going to create these 12 columns that we just talked about in the presentation. Let me go ahead and line this up. I'll get everything lined up, and then if you want to pause the video, it'd be a good time for you to pause once I get everything lined up so you can type things in. I'll tell you when. Let me get these all set up with my editor. Didn't mean to undo that. So now I've got these 12 divs that are inside my row. Let me go ahead and bring this row tag up so you can see how they're laid out here. And you'll notice I've got a class of col-md-1. And what that means in Bootstrap is it's a column, it's medium, it's for a medium-sized screen, and it's going to take up one of those 12 column spaces. And you'll notice I put text inside each one of those divs, just labeling column 1 through 12. And that's just so that we have some content in there so that you can actually see how they lay out. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type this in. The next thing I want to do is I want to go up into my head section because I want to add a small style section to this. Normally I would use external style sheets for this, but for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just going to have some styles that are inside my HTML document. And again, this is just for the presentation so that you can actually see what we're doing here. I'm just going to create a class. I'm going to call it color1. And I'm going to give it a background color. And I'm just going to use a nice light blue background color, probably 9FC should be good. little hexadecimal value there. I'm going to go ahead and save that inside my grid1.html. And then I want to add this class inside the classes of my columns. And again, I'm just doing this so that we can actually have something to see on the screen, so you can see as we're playing with these exactly what we've created. So I'm just going to add that color1 class into all my columns. Going to go ahead and save all those changes. So you see now we've got 12 individual divs on our page. I've given each div a class of col-md-1, which is column medium 1 section of our 12 column div. And then I've given them all a class of color1, so they're all going to have a background color. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser so we can bring that grid1 up. I'm going to save everything. And let's go ahead and load that grid1.html. And you'll see now, as I resize my screen, that I have these 12 columns across my screen. And by the way, you notice as I resize, it actually resizes or reshapes itself on the screen. That's the beauty of Bootstrap. As that viewport gets smaller, it actually makes this thing one on top of the other instead of across the entire length of the screen. This is a 1280 screen, by the way, so you'll see on a normal display, on a normal monitor, we'd see these things across the top. But as we get into the smaller displays, for instance, iPad displays or tablet displays, now they stack on top of one another. Doesn't look very impressive right here, but you'll see as we move further along and you start understanding how this grid works, this is a very, very cool concept for designing our pages. I know, not very impressive. It's 12 columns across the page. But actually it is. Let's go ahead and add one other style up here. Again, it makes it a little easier for you to see what we're doing. I'm just going to add a border property to all these. I'm going to give it 1 pixel, solid, and we're just going to give it a color of black, just so that you can see the border around each one of these columns. Go ahead and refresh that screen, and you can see now exactly what we've created with that 12 column display. And you can see now as they stack, again, because it's responsive, they stack on top of one another. You can see what's going on with the border. But let's go one step further. Let's demonstrate how we'd actually really set something up here for a real page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down below that row, and I'm going to create a div with another row. So I'm going to give this a class of row, because remember, our columns must be enclosed or must be contained inside of a row. Let's do something that's a little bit more realistic to what we may want to do with a real live web page. And again, I'm just going to say that this is the end of the row. So I'm going to make my annotation down here that's the end of my row div. What I want to do now is I'm going to actually add another div. So inside my row, I'm going to add a div. I'm going to give this one a class equal to col-md-8. So what I'm saying now is instead of using one of those 12 sections, I want to use 8 of those 12 sections. I'm going to close out that div, and I'm going to say, I'm going to just type in here 8 columns of the grid. Let's close out that div tag. I'm going to come down right below that. I'm going to say class equal col-md-4. And again, we want this to equal 12, remember, because it's 12 columns across our entire viewport, our entire screen. So now I'm going to say it's 4 columns of our div. Let's go ahead and close out that div. And again, I'm going to do the same thing I had done last time. I'm just going to add a different color style to this. I'm going to say .color2. So I'm going to make a new class at the top, color2. I'm going to give this one a background color. So we had light green for the top one. Let's use a light blue. So I'm going to say 9cc. And again, I'm going to do the same thing with the border. I'm going to give it a border around it so it's easier for you to distinguish what we're doing. 1 pixel, solid. This one I think I'll do a dark gray 999. Save that change. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and refresh our browser window. And now you see, oops, I didn't assign the class. So I want to take that class and I want to assign it to my div. so that we actually pick the class up with those divs. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Refresh our browser window. And you'll see now that I've got an 8 column. Let's go ahead and expand this so it actually goes to the full page. You'll see now I've got 8 columns of the grid and 4 columns of the grid right below that previous row. So again, you're getting to see an idea of what we can do with this grid system. And again, the beauty of Bootstrap is this is responsive. As that viewport gets smaller, it stacks upon itself. So it becomes very responsive to the viewport itself. All right, so let's continue with our demonstration. One thing I do want to do, because these are right on top of one another, I'm just going to add a little bit of margin to each one of these. I'm just going to give it a margin top and bottom. Let's give it 10 pixels top and bottom, and we'll give it 10 pixels right and left. I'm going to do the same thing with our color 2, so that we just get a little bit of separation between these, so that you can actually see how this is appearing on the page. And keep in mind now, because of what we've done with our pixels, that side-to-side pixels, we've actually changed the layout. So actually, let's get rid of this left and right. Put that back to 0, because I want to make certain that we can get a full viewport with the size screen that we have. And now you see we actually get a little bit of space between the top and bottom of this layout. Let's do one more demonstration. So we've looked at a 12 column layout, we've looked at a 2 column layout. Let's actually look at a 3 column layout. And there's a couple different ways we can do this. First thing, remember, we've got to set up that row. So we set up our row, opening div and our closing div in that row tag. I'm just going to go ahead and take my comment and put that where we close the row tag. Now I want to set up a 3 column. And again, keeping in mind that everything's based on 12 columns across, you can probably already guess how we're going to do that. I'm going to give this one a class equal to col4 or md-4. So again, I'm taking that 12, because I know I have 12 columns that go across the viewport or across the screen, and I want 3 of them, and I want them evenly spaced, so I'm going to go ahead and give it 4 columns. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this text so you don't have to watch me type so much. Just going to paste that in there and say that's a 4 column. Then I'm going to go ahead and close that div, and I'm going to do the same thing for the next 2. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, and I'm just going to paste that in 2 more times, right below it. Go ahead and bring this back up so it's easy to see what we're doing. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. I'm going to set up another style for this one also. So I'm just going to say color 3. We're going to give it a background color, and I'll give this one a background color of kind of light orange, FC6. And we're going to give this one the same thing with a border. We'll give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and I'll make this one a little bit darker gray. 666, and again, I'm going to give it the same thing with a margin. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this margin from our previous and give it a margin of 10 pixels. And then I'm going to make sure I put this class in each one of those 3 divs so that we can see how this is displayed. Let's go ahead and save that change and refresh our screen, and now we should see our 12 column at the top, our 2 column below it, and now our 3 column below that. And you can see how the grid system is actually working inside of Bootstrap. And the beauty of this is we didn't have to do anything. We just had to understand what these classes are. And we've got a lot more to talk about on the grid system, and we're going to, because I really want you to get a good grasp of how this works. Another thing I want you to understand is not everything is MD. I'm using the medium for our demonstration, but we actually have a couple different size grids that we can use, and we'll talk about those and some other things that we can do with this grid system in the next tutorial.